Critics of Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump may be celebrating a little after the US president called the Israeli Prime Minister effing crazy over a phone call that the two had, in which it was clear that Netanyahu indicated that he wanted to continue to prosecute his campaign against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Now, this is against the background of the Iranians saying, if that campaign continues, then we won't agree a ceasefire in the broader war that the Israelis and the Americans jointly launched back in February. Now, that war has proved to be a political disaster for Donald Trump at home, with 60% of Americans now saying, according to a recent poll, that they do not support Israel. That is a leap of 20 percentage points since 2022, an enormous collapse of support for Israel at a time when Donald Trump is looking out to the midterm elections and a possibility, in his own words, that he might get indicted if Congress were to swing to the Democrats. They're currently, both houses currently dominated by Republican senators and representatives. Now, in that context, Donald Trump has said he fears indictment. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu's already been indicted by the International Criminal Court. He's also currently on trial on a range of corruption charges. Now, that trial process keeps getting kicked down the road because of the conflicts that are going on at the moment. And indeed, Donald Trump pointed this out, saying that Benjamin Netanyahu would be in prison if it weren't for him. Now, that is an outright admission that part of the reason for Israel getting involved in this war in Iran and indeed in Lebanon against Hezbollah is part of a distraction process to keep Benjamin Netanyahu out of court in his own country, where he could face a jail time as a consequence. So all of this is a roiling mess, but it doesn't indicate at all that Donald Trump is now standing up, if you like, to the Israeli Prime Minister, because he is the only president that has agreed with Benjamin Netanyahu, and that includes Joe Biden, Barack Obama, George Bush Jr., all of whom he has presented the case for war against Iran to knock out its nuclear weapons program. And in all of those conversations he's had, he's warned that the Iranians were dangerously close to developing a doomsday weapon with which they could annihilate the Jewish state. That has only been accepted to be true by Donald Trump, who launched this joint operation in February. And the consequence of that is that not only is support for him domestically, but also for Israel collapsing. The US military is now in a position in which it is prosecuting a war inside Iran entirely from the air, because its own generals have advised and almost refused to participate in a ground assault. The theocracy that runs that country is further entrenched. There's been no sign of a popular uprising against a deeply domestically oppressive regime that has also been responsible for destabilization across the whole of the Middle East. And of course, they've also managed to close the Straits of Hormuz and send the oil price market into turmoil, but above all, shooting upwards at a time when, particularly in the West, economies were already struggling to get any kind of economic growth moving forward. So this has been a catastrophe for Donald Trump. Every now and again, he has to say something nasty about his friend Benjamin Netanyahu, who he admires as a wartime leader. Remember back in June last year, he said that the Israelis didn't know what they were doing.
They don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
After they attacked with missiles Hamas offices, the headquarters of Hamas in the Gulf state of Qatar, an American ally, the home of the biggest US base in the whole, airbase in the whole of the Middle East. Very close to it, the Israelis conducted airstrikes without any kind of reference to the Americans. At that time, again, Trump using the F word to criticize the Israelis, but no change in policy. And that is because ultimately there are three people on earth that seem to be able to pull the puppet strings of Donald Trump and get him to represent their point of view. Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, Russia and China, big major powers, part of Donald Trump's philosophy that the world should be divided into spheres of influence. And then the Prime Minister of Israel, a very small strategic player in many ways, but the Israelis traditionally have had a very large and heavy influence on domestic politics inside the United States, but also personally, Donald Trump is quite excited by being alongside somebody like Benjamin Netanyahu, who has a deep voice, he has a background in special forces and a reputation in the United States, especially for considerable machismo. And it is that Netanyahu uses to mesmerize the American president.